He built this company from nothing. That morning, they walked in and put him in handcuffs, right in front of everyone he'd ever hired. Every piece of evidence pointed straight at him. Every piece of evidence was wrong. He didn't know that behind that door was the one person in the entire building who already knew he was innocent. She had built her entire career on a case only 2 people alive knew the full truth about. She was looking at one of their faces right now.
If you've ever done the right thing quietly, expecting nothing in return, stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened in that federal holding room proves that some debts get paid back in ways you'd never expect. And if stories like this move you, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because you do not want to miss what's coming. Marcus Webb had spent most of his adult life believing that doing the right thing rarely came with a reward attached, and mostly, he'd made peace with that. He was 31 years old when his wife, Angela, left without warning one spring morning, leaving behind a note, a wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and a 4-year-old daughter named Sophia, who wouldn't fully understand for years why her mother's side of the closet had gone empty overnight. Marcus never spoke badly about Angela to Sophia, not once, not even in his angriest, most exhausted moments, because he decided early on that his daughter deserved a father who built her a stable life rather than one who poisoned her memories. At the time, Marcus worked as a senior internal auditor at Halcyon Capital Partners, a mid-sized investment firm with an outwardly polished reputation, and as Marcus slowly discovered over 18 months of quiet, careful review, a set of books that didn't add up in ways that made his stomach turn. What he uncovered wasn't a simple accounting error, it was a deliberate layered fraud scheme. Client funds quietly redirected through shell accounts. False returns reported to hundreds of investors who had no idea their retirement savings were being systematically stolen. Marcus discovered it almost entirely by accident, cross-referencing a discrepancy nobody else had bothered to double-check, and once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. He agonized for weeks before deciding what to do, fully aware of what blowing the whistle on his own employer could cost him. His job, certainly, but potentially far more than that, given how much money and how many powerful people were involved. He had a 4-year-old daughter depending entirely on him, no partner to fall back on, and a mortgage that assumed a paycheck he was about to willingly destroy. But every night he looked at Sophia asleep in her bed and thought about all the other families whose futures were being quietly stolen, and he knew, with a certainty that surprised even him, that he couldn't simply look away. Marcus contacted the FBI anonymously at first. Then, once he understood the scale of what he'd found, cooperated fully and secretly with federal investigators for nearly a year, providing documentation, testimony, and financial analysis that became the backbone of what would eventually become one of the largest investment fraud prosecutions in the state's history. He insisted on one condition throughout the entire process: his identity remained sealed and protected, not out of cowardice, but because he had a young daughter with no other parent, and he refused to risk her safety for recognition he didn't need. The young assistant U.S. attorney assigned to build the case, a sharp, relentless woman named Denise Reyes, barely 5 years into her federal career, worked directly with Marcus's sealed testimony for months, communicating through secure channels, never once learning his actual name, referring to him only by the case designation, Confidential Witness 12. The prosecution succeeded spectacularly. Halcyon's founder and 2 senior executives were convicted on dozens of counts of securities fraud. Hundreds of defrauded investors received meaningful restitution, and Denise Reyes, whose meticulous handling of the case earned her significant recognition within the Department of Justice, was promoted twice in the following 6 years, eventually rising to senior federal prosecutor. She never forgot the case, and she never forgot the anonymous witness whose documentation had made the entire prosecution possible, often telling junior colleagues over the years that somewhere out there was a person who had risked everything, asked for nothing, and never even let her say thank you properly. Marcus, meanwhile, rebuilt his life quietly and deliberately after Halcyon collapsed under its own fraud, taking a modest severance package from the wind-down process and using it, along with every dollar of savings he could scrape together, to start a small financial technology company called Ledger Clear, built specifically around the kind of transparent, auditable accounting systems he wished had existed at Halcyon before everything went wrong. He built it slowly over the following decade, largely alone at first, working from a spare bedroom converted into an office while Sophia did homework at the kitchen table just outside his door, growing Ledger Clear, one careful client relationship at a time, into a respected mid-sized fintech company, serving small businesses across the region. Sophia grew up watching her father's quiet, steady discipline, never flashy, never boastful, simply consistent in a way that shaped her own character more than either of them fully realized until years later. By the time Sophia was in high school, Ledger Clear employed nearly 60 people, and Marcus had earned a reputation in the local business community as scrupulously honest, occasionally to the frustration of investors who wanted him to cut corners he flatly refused to cut. "I already watched what cutting corners does to people," he'd tell them simply, declining to elaborate further on a past he'd never publicly discussed. The trouble began 18 months before Sophia's high school graduation, when Marcus brought on a new business partner, Richard Calloway, to help manage Ledger Clear's rapid expansion into a new regional market. Richard was polished, charismatic, and initially impressive, but within a year, Marcus began noticing small inconsistencies in expansion budget reports that Richard oversaw directly. Inconsistencies Richard always explained away smoothly, plausibly, in ways that made Marcus feel almost paranoid for questioning them. Marcus, still carrying the instincts of a career auditor, quietly began cross-referencing Richard's reports against the underlying transaction data himself, late at night, after Sophia had gone to bed, the same careful, methodical process that had once uncovered Halcyon's fraud years earlier. What Marcus didn't know was that Richard had discovered his quiet investigation first. Richard, it turned out, had been embezzling company funds through a series of falsified vendor contracts for nearly a year, siphoning money into accounts under family members' names, and upon realizing Marcus was closing in on the truth, Richard made a calculated, ruthless decision. Rather than get caught, he would strike first, fabricating a trail of financial records designed to make it appear that Marcus himself was the one behind the embezzlement, then anonymously tipping off federal investigators before Marcus could expose the real scheme. The morning it happened, Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports at his own desk when the office lobby doors opened and 4 federal agents walked in, warrant in hand, moving directly toward his office with a certainty that told Marcus immediately this was no misunderstanding waiting to be cleared up quickly. He stood as they approached, more confused than afraid at first, right up until the moment an agent instructed him to place his hands behind his back. Marcus's employees, people he'd personally hired, mentored, celebrated birthdays and promotions with, stood frozen in stunned silence as handcuffs clicked shut around the wrists of the man who had built the company standing around them. "There's been a mistake," Marcus said calmly, though his voice carried an edge even he couldn't fully control. "I need to make a phone call." The agents, following standard procedure, offered no immediate explanation beyond the warrant citation, walking him out through his own lobby past employees who watched in shocked disbelief, several already reaching for phones to call Sophia, who was in her senior economics class discussing with almost unbearable irony a case study on corporate fraud, when her phone began buzzing uncontrollably. Marcus spent the following hours in a federal holding room, stripped of his phone, his laptop, his company badge, replaying every financial report Richard had ever handed him, understanding with growing dread exactly how thoroughly he'd been set up, and understanding with equal dread how difficult it might be to prove his own innocence against records that had clearly been engineered to implicate him specifically. He sat at the metal table, wrists still marked faintly red from the cuffs, and thought more than anything about Sophia hearing this news without him there to explain it to her directly. 3 floors up, in the federal prosecutor's office assigned to review the newly opened embezzlement case before it proceeded to formal charges, Denise Reyes sat down with the case file that had landed on her desk that afternoon, scanning the initial evidence summary with the same meticulous attention she brought to every case in her 17 years as a federal prosecutor. She flipped to the suspect information page, glancing first at the falsified vendor documentation the arresting agents had cited as probable cause, before her eyes moved to the photograph clipped to the top of the file. She stopped completely still. It took her nearly 10 seconds to place exactly why the face in front of her felt so immediately, viscerally familiar, and when the recognition finally landed, it landed with the force of an old memory surfacing all at once, the same steady eyes, slightly older now, that she remembered from a single sealed courtroom document she'd studied for months, without ever once being permitted to see the person behind it. Denise pulled up the department's sealed witness archive with trembling hands, cross-referencing the old case number against Marcus Webb's legal name buried in a decade-old unsealing authorization she'd requested years earlier out of simple professional curiosity, never expecting to actually need it. The match was unmistakable. The man sitting in a federal holding room 3 floors below her, accused of the very kind of financial fraud he'd once risked everything to expose, was confidential witness 12. Denise didn't wait for standard channels. She gathered the case file, walked directly to her supervising attorney's office, and requested, with an urgency that surprised even her own colleagues, an immediate hold on formal charges pending her personal review of the evidence, citing what she diplomatically described as significant concerns regarding evidentiary reliability without yet revealing the full personal context driving her instinct. Her supervisor, trusting her 17-year track record implicitly, granted the hold. Denise made her way down to the holding room herself rather than sending a junior attorney, folder gripped tightly, replaying in her mind everything she remembered about the meticulous, careful documentation confidential witness 12 had provided all those years ago. Documentation built by someone who clearly understood financial fraud investigation at an expert level. Someone whose entire methodology, she now realized with mounting certainty, looked nothing like the sloppy, obvious fabrications sitting in the current embezzlement file against him. She opened the door and found Marcus seated calmly at the metal table, wrists faintly marked, expression composed despite everything. She set the folder down slowly, studying his face for a long moment before speaking. "Marcus Webb," she said quietly, watching recognition and confusion mix across his features at the sound of a stranger, somehow knowing his full name with such certainty. 11 years ago, you were confidential witness 12 on the Halcyon Capital case. I built one of the biggest prosecutions of my career on your documentation, and I never got to say thank you properly because you insisted on staying sealed to protect your daughter." Marcus stared at her, several pieces clicking into place at once. "You're Reyes," he said slowly, "the young Ada who ran that case." Denise nodded. "I outranked the agents who arrested you this morning, and I am personally reviewing every piece of evidence in this file, starting right now, because the methodology behind these financial fabrications does not remotely match the mind of the man who built the Halcyon case for me 11 years ago." Over the following 72 hours, Denise personally led a forensic review of the falsified vendor contracts, working alongside a small trusted team, applying the exact kind of granular financial cross-referencing Marcus himself had once taught federal investigators through his own sealed testimony years earlier. The fabrications, once properly scrutinized, revealed clear digital timestamp inconsistencies and metadata traces leading directly back to Richard Calloway's personal work account, alongside a paper trail connecting the embezzled funds to accounts registered under Richard's brother-in-law's name. Within 3 days, formal charges against Marcus were dropped entirely, and a new federal warrant was issued for Richard Calloway, who was apprehended attempting to transfer remaining funds out of the country less than a week later. Sophia was waiting at the federal building's entrance when Marcus finally walked out a free man, and she crossed the distance between them at a dead run, wrapping her arms around him so tightly that Marcus nearly lost his footing on the courthouse steps. "I knew it wasn't true," she said into his shoulder, voice thick with relief. "I knew it, Dad. I told everyone at school it wasn't true." Marcus held her for a long moment, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened, before pulling back to look at her properly. "You didn't have to defend me," he said gently, But thank you for doing it anyway. Denise personally oversaw the public correction of the case, ensuring Ledger Clear's business reputation was formally and clearly restored through an official department statement, careful to frame the resolution honestly without exposing details of Marcus's sealed past testimony that he still preferred to keep private. Privately, over coffee weeks later, she finally got the chance to say the thank you she'd been carrying for over a decade. You could have stayed anonymous forever, she told him. Most people would have. I need you to know that case changed the direction of my entire career, and I've thought about the person behind those documents more times than I can count. Marcus smiled, something easing in his chest that had been tight for 11 years. I didn't do it for recognition, he said, but I won't pretend it doesn't mean something, hearing it now. Richard Calloway was convicted within the year on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, receiving a sentence that reflected both the financial damage he'd caused and the deliberate attempt to frame an innocent man in his place. Ledger Clear not only recovered from the incident but grew stronger from it, several new clients citing the transparent, almost obsessive integrity of its founder as the deciding factor in choosing to work with the company. Marcus, for his part, changed very little about how he ran things day to day, though he did finally allow the story of confidential witness 12 to become public at Sophia's gentle urging. Not for personal credit, but so other young employees considering whether to report wrongdoing they discovered might understand that doing the right thing, even quietly, even without recognition, still mattered. Sophia went on to study forensic accounting in college, citing openly in her application essay the morning she watched her father walk out of a federal building innocent, and the woman who had believed in him before she'd even properly met him. Marcus kept a single framed photograph on his office desk from that week, not of the handcuffs, not of the courthouse, but of Sophia's face the exact moment she saw him walk free. A quiet, permanent reminder that doing right by people, even strangers, even years apart, has a way of finding its way back around when you least expect it. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me writing it, make sure you're subscribed, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share it with someone who still believes that quiet integrity is never wasted. Because somewhere out there today, someone doing the right thing anonymously has no idea whose life they're about to change.